Hello, this video is going to go over how to complete your research article evaluations. In your class, you're probably doing some research for a paper, and you may have been given a template by me to fill out. Even if this is not for your class and you're just using this at another time to write a paper, it's still helpful. So I'm going to go through a process with a paper that we're going to be using in our class called Funds of Knowledge for Teaching, and we're going to use that as an example. So I'm going to share my screen and show you the template first. So here in this template, you'll see there's a few things that it asks for. In the very beginning, of course, first I'm going to put the title, and we're going to just click in that header and type it in. Now this is typically for your own notes, so it's up to you if you want to keep writing the whole thing if it's got a really long title. I'm just going to leave it at that. And then the authors, this is for my own reference again, so I'm going to type the names, but I'm not going to put the whole citation right now. Of course you could if you wanted to save yourself time later, but I'm not going to at this moment. So I've got my authors and the title of the paper up there. And now you'll see that it asks me a few questions. And what I want to do is I want to get familiar with these questions first, and then go and look at the text and see if I can identify those things as I read through it. And if you've already perused the text a little, maybe you've skimmed it and you kind of found out some of these things from the beginning, that might be easy for you to answer, but I'm just going to take a look at them first. The first one is, who or what was the subject of the study? That question is asking me who was being studied or what was being studied in this article. So is it about students or teachers, and who and what and where was this happening? We want those kind of details about who is involved. The next one asks, what kind of research was conducted? Qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods? We've studied a little bit already about the difference between qualitative and quantitative, but if you haven't heard of mixed methods, it's exactly what it sounds like. Basically, it's a type of study that uses a little bit of both. So they might have given a quantitative survey, but also chosen a focus group to do an interview with or something like that. So that happens quite a bit. And when you see that happening, that's a mixed method. So you should be familiar enough to know what kind it is and put your answer here, and also explain how you know that. How is the data gathered? And that would relate directly to this previous question. So if it's a qualitative study, then the data might have been gathered through interviews, observations, things like that. If it was a quantitative study, they're probably maybe pulling test scores or doing survey results or things like that. The next question is asking, what were the findings? So usually you can find this in the end of the article. Near the end, the author will have either a section labeled findings or something similar to that, like outcomes or results of the study. And so you might want to look at that and just kind of skim through ahead of time and look at those headings to get familiar. The next question is, are there potential weaknesses in this study? Now, I want to caution you that this does not mean that there's something wrong with the study or it's a bad article to use. All research studies have weaknesses. That is part of the game. There is no such thing as a perfect study. So you want to be aware of what those potential weaknesses might be, because it helps you later on write about it. You're not going to focus on the weaknesses. You're going to focus on the important findings that do support your argument. But it's important to know what those weaknesses are so that you're not focused on the wrong part of the article. What is the significance of the findings? This is the important part. What is the outcome that we should use? Often the author will include a section called implications or significance, and you'll see that at the end. And this is where they're actually going to come out and tell you what they think is important about their study. So you don't really have to do a lot of interpreting when it comes to that, but you can also add your own ideas about how this is relevant to your research question. So now I'm going to go ahead and share another window with you, and that is of the article itself. So we can take a look at it together and see if we can find these things. All right, so I've already highlighted in my copy, you see a few of the answers that I found as I just kind of reread this article recently. So this is an old article, and that's purposeful. You'll see that we're reading this old one because, in fact, there's a lot of newer work on this, but I wanted you to be exposed to the beginning stages of this kind of research and who was doing it early on and how it kind of later grew into a larger project. So you'll see some of that in here. You can tell from the very beginning here, I've already highlighted some of the subjects of the study. It says Mexican communities in Tucson, Arizona. So that's who they were studying in the first part of this. Now, if you read this whole article, you would see that this article actually is kind of a two-parter. The second half talks about a continuation of this study where they had a second group of teachers that they used to do another round of the same kind of research. So if you keep looking, you'll see a little bit more about some subjects later on, but I believe it's pretty similar. So they're often, it looks like in maybe a different city, a different group of teachers, but also focusing on their students in Mexican American communities. So now that I know that, right, I'm going to put in my template, and I'll put this back up there for you in a moment. The first part, we have working class, and this is just what the authors call it. Mexican communities in Tucson, Arizona. All right, later on, they actually kind of shift the focus from the students to the teachers. So I'm gonna add, later on, I found teachers doing research in student households, because I found that to be the second part, okay? Let me just show you what I've done so far, and you can see. Notice that this is a set of notes for me. It's not meant to be detailed. I can turn these into sentences later. I can even, when I've turned them into sentences, I can go and I can copy and paste them into my paper if I decide to cite this article. I may decide that this is such a great piece of work that I want to include it in my annotated bibliography and later use it in my paper. And so this is basically my set of notes that I'm going to use to later on organize myself when I'm going to do some writing. So let me go back to the article again, and let's see what else we can find. The next question on my template was what kind of research was conducted. And usually you'll be able to see that very clearly laid out. In this case, the author says qualitatively, very clearly right there, that this is a qualitative study. It talks about qualitative research and the methodological strategies they used to study these families. So they use ethnographic observations, open-ended interviewing, strategies, life histories, and case studies. So right here, the author explained all of this to me in only the second paragraph. And often you will find that this is very common. Early in the article, the author will tell you. So now that I know that, I'm going to go ahead and add that to my template. All right. So I'm going to put qualitative, and then I'm just going to make a note to myself about how I know that. It said in there, ethnographic observations, which by the way means that you are among the community. Basically, an ethnography is almost like living among the people to study them. And so you're going into their homes and their communities, and you're living among them as you take these notes and observe. You're not just reading about them or giving them a survey. You're coming in to be among them for periods of time and really take in a lot of the details about their life. So that's what an ethnography is. And these are ethnographic observations because they went into their homes. Open-ended interviewing. And I believe they say that because a lot of times interviews will be very focused, and you might have a large number of people you interview, and you're just looking for a few straightforward answers to see how many people will answer a certain way. And you might even have a scale with which you determine what those answers meant. But in general, interviews are usually in qualitative studies. And when they say open-ended, that means that they went in maybe with some questions, but they really didn't have a specific direction it needed to go. They wanted to let the conversation kind of lead its own direction, whatever way it went, whatever people want to share. They ask open-ended questions that allow for elaboration and the person to share all kinds of stories. So they have life histories and case studies. I'm going to go ahead and add that as well. So they use a range of different sources of material to put together their analysis of data. So they didn't just take one piece, they took several different types of data and put it together. And so that's often what you see in qualitative research. That's why the explanation and description of the data in a qualitative study is very long, because they're taking several different types of information and they're synthesizing it. We also note here that it says households, that the people they studied here, these students, are from households usually viewed as being poor. They put that in quotation marks, emphasizing that this is a label that they don't like, not only economically, but in terms of quality or experiences for the child. And they are addressing a very clear political stance here with this statement by explaining that they basically don't agree with that. They don't like this attitude, which is kind of deficit thinking. And so hence the whole purpose of this study, as you can probably tell by the title, Funds of Knowledge, is to explore what they do know, not what they don't know. We're looking at what is right about these families, what positive things and learning that can happen at home, not what they're not learning. Okay, so that's an attitude you can already gather from looking at how they describe their data here. The next question, how was it gathered? Okay, so if we keep reading here, we're gonna see all kinds of explanation that talks about how they basically sent anthropology researchers into homes and then trained the teachers. But then later, they took a group of teachers and worked side by side with the researchers, and they found that to be a more beneficial process. So there's actually two people doing this. So I'm gonna go back to my template here. And I'm gonna explain, just summarize what I know. I don't really need to quote anything. I'm just gonna summarize anthropologists and teachers observed and interviewed families in their community. So that's a unique style of gathering data, and that's what was happening here. There's a lot more detail I could include, but for the sake of doing this quickly and just taking my notes and getting everything down, I'm just gonna go quickly. Let's look at the next question. What were the findings? Okay, so there's a couple places in this article that I can find that. And often it's very clearly labeled, right? And you'll see some basic findings right here. It's already clearly labeled, right? I highlighted a few things: social history of households, origins and development, labor history of families, and accumulated bodies of knowledge of the household. So that's some things that they learned. So I'm gonna put researchers found social histories, labor histories, and accumulated bodies of knowledge. Now notice that when I type this, I'm kind of using some of their phrases, but I'm also paraphrasing others. If I do decide to go and use this in my paper, I'm probably going to come back to the original text and decide if I want to quote them directly or paraphrase them as I've been doing in my notes. Either way, I want to appropriately cite them, okay? Let me come back to this so you can see what I've put so far. I'll just jump back here real fast so you can see what I've got in there so far is researchers found social histories, labor histories, and accumulated bodies of knowledge from families, community, in the community. I should have a the there. There we go. All right, and then I'm gonna keep going because I know there's more here, and I know this is kind of a two-part study. And actually, if you keep reading, you notice that this is from 1990, it's copyrighted 2001, but I think the original publication here, it goes 1992. So this is an old one, but later on, several years later, they have a book that came out called Funds of Knowledge with these same authors, where they actually continued the study and continued several rounds of this research and put it all together in a large book. So this is the very beginning you're seeing here. You can also see the data is kind of laid out nicely in a little table. Often we see tables for quantitative, but when we see them like this is what tells you it's qualitative still, because we're seeing descriptors, right? Sample of household funds of knowledge. So these families knew a lot about agriculture. They had some scientific knowledge, repair of, so there's some maintenance and repair, some different skills related to work and careers here, medicine, economics, household management, and religion. So they gathered information about all these sorts of things, okay? We can keep going here and see that the teacher in these home-based contexts of learning will know the child as a whole person, not merely as a student. That actually sounds more like one of the findings as well. So I'm going to put that in that same box. Teachers developed understanding of the whole student. And again, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's interesting to see an article where one of the findings is actually what the teacher learned, not what the students learned, right? And that's kind of the approach they took here. They flipped it a little bit. Instead of just studying students, they studied teachers and what the teachers got out of it. So we can keep looking here, and there's other details we could add about the community that they learned. Right here, I highlighted some. Children in the households are not passive bystanders. They seem as they seem in the classrooms, but active participants in a broad range of activities mediated by these social relationships. So we can put that related to this whole student idea. We can add a little bit more. Students, or children actually, probably a better term, are active, not passive. That's a finding that they found in studying these households. Right here, funds of knowledge for teaching. So this goes on to add a little bit more. This is kind of the significance, I'm guessing, because we're past the findings and now we're talking about how is this going to be used. Our analysis of funds of knowledge represents a positive view of households as containing ample cultural and cognitive resources with great potential utility for classroom instruction. This view of households, we should mention, contrasts sharply with prevailing and accepting perceptions of working class families as somehow disorganized socially and deficient intellectually, perceptions that are well accepted and rarely challenged in the field of education and elsewhere. So this is a pretty strong social stance they're taking, socio-political stance, I should say, as well. And so we want to note that in the significance of this study, that would be important to add. So the findings, you're also going to see some significance that you want to add. What else was important about that? That's my last column down here. And I'll go back to weaknesses in a moment. I'm just going to skip around because I just found this. So let me go ahead and jump back to this section. And you'll see my template is a Word document, so it's going to keep expanding as I type in it, and that's fine. I'm going to put funds of knowledge for teaching helps combat deficit thinking about working class families. That's again me paraphrasing, but if I wanted to come back, I could find it. Another smart thing I could do while I'm taking these notes, if I see that that's an idea I definitely want to write about, I could even give myself a little reminder as to where I found it. And I might put page 134 next to that paraphrase that I've written, just to remind myself that's where I want to go back and check if I'm going to write about that. So there's another section I still need, which is weaknesses, right? Right here, I've highlighted something that the authors chose to share. In analyzing our efforts, however, we realized that we had relied on researchers to present their findings to the teachers and to figure out the relevance of the information for teaching. Although we were careful about our desires not to impose, but to collaborate with teachers, this collaboration did not extend to the conduct of the research. In our work with teachers, at least as far as household data were concerned, we relied on transmission model. We presented the information, teachers received it without actively involving themselves in the development or production of this knowledge. So they're coming right out with the weakness, and they're saying, you know, we messed up a little bit here in this first part of the study. It it maybe didn't go as well as we thought because the teachers were a little more passive than we wanted. You can see here at the bottom of page 134, that's where I found that. So it goes on to talk about how they decided to correct that, and they did another round of the study. They gathered 10 teachers to participate again. They gave them more workshops and trained them how to do their own field notes and observations. And then they went out and did another study. Okay, so I might include some information on that here. So let me go back to my template here of notes and we'll add that. The first round, research. Data was delivered in a, what's the phrase they used? I like their phrase, transmission model. Instead of collaborative. The authors felt the teachers were too passive, and with the second round of research, they provided more training. Teachers became collaborative researchers. Okay, so that's what I gathered from that. And I've added it in here so I can summarize that myself later if I decide to write about it. I don't always need to write about the weakness of a study in my paper, but it's important for me to know, right? If I only read the beginning and I didn't read this far, then I wouldn't realize that the study kept going, right? And that the authors were aware of a weakness and they kept going and they added a little more to it. Sometimes you'll find that in qualitative studies, especially, they might see that there's a problem with the data and they might correct their methodology and continue. They will continue in a new way. They will add some piece of new data that is going to counterbalance the weakness that they found. So you will see that happen quite a bit in qualitative research. So it's important to read the whole article to make sure you get all the information. So let's review what I've got here. So I've got my title at the top, my authors, who or what was the subject of the study, working class Mexican communities in Tucson, Arizona, and also teachers doing research in student households. I might go back and add, if I really wanted to, the details, right? I could put 10 teachers, and I could add whatever details I wanted. I'll just put that there so you get the idea. What kind of research was conducted? I found it was qualitative. If you're not sure, start flipping through the whole text and see what kinds of findings they present. Usually qualitative research is going to be presented in long descriptions, and quantitative is going to be presented in numbers. Okay, so just be aware of that and start looking for it if you're not sure. Usually, like I said, the authors will clearly label what kind of research it is, and then you'll see these kinds of things listed if it's qualitative. If it's quantitative, you'll see different kind of analysis done. How was it gathered? Anthropologists and teachers observed and interviewed families in their community. If I wanted to go back and add a little bit more after reading the whole thing, I could talk about how they did their observations, what kind of field notes they took. I could add more details, but I have enough here to understand what it was about. The next two, what was the findings? Researchers found social histories, labor histories, and accumulated bodies of knowledge from families in the community. And teachers developed understanding of the whole student. Children are active, not passive. So these are all paraphrased important findings that I took from the article, and you're perfectly welcome to paraphrase like that. I think that's totally fine. You don't need to feel the need to quote everything all the time, right? It's actually a good habit to get into, to just find important stuff and put it in your own words, especially in your notes. The next one, potential weaknesses. We found that they did a second round of their research, so I made a note of that and what they changed. And then finally, the significance of the findings. Funds of knowledge for teaching helps combat deficit thinking about working class families. That definitely seemed to be one of the significant pieces of findings, but I also might add how the teachers used this information. Teachers implemented new teaching strategies. And I could go into more detail about that if I wanted to. But this is enough, okay? So this is what you're going to be doing for our class. And I highly suggest that you hang on to this template and use it in the future when you're doing any kind of a research paper and you pick out a study, and you should be able to answer all these questions about a research article you are planning on writing about in your paper or citing. Even if you're just going to paraphrase one little part, you should be able to answer all these. If you can't find the answers to some of these, there's one of two options. One, you didn't understand it and you missed it. Maybe go back and read it again. Or two, they're not including it. Maybe it's not a very good study. Just because you found it in a journal, you found it on Google Scholar or wherever you got it, the library, does not mean it's a valid study. You want to be very critical of this. This is why it's called a research article evaluation. Were these findings important enough for the field that you're trying to research or not? And if you find that this last piece down here, the significance of the findings, is not really relevant to your study, then you might ditch that article and not use it. I know that seems kind of frustrating to do a lot of reading and get to the point where you're going to now take notes and realize this isn't something good for my paper, but it's better than adding it in there and having to take it out later. So read the abstract, read some of the headings, get familiar with it, read these questions again and see what you're looking for, and then go through your article in detail and see if you can answer these. That's what I would like you to be sure you know how to do when you're picking out your articles. And please contact me if you have any problems with any part of that. Good luck.